There's a rage that hits at 6 a.m., sharper than any alarm. I step outside in a bathrobe, coffee still hot, and my 14-year driveway is gone, jackhammered, coned off, reeking of diesel. The crunch of gravel under steel treads still echoing off my fence. No call, no knock, just a cheap orange sign jammed into my lawn. Community enhancement, temporary access. I'm Garrett Holloway, Pinecrest Falls, Virginia. Same half-acre for 14 years. Patched those cracks myself. Shoveled every storm. And Constance Vreeland, HOA president, 11 years, brass buttons and all, decided I was the one neighbor who wouldn't fight back. She didn't know I'd spent years quietly reading every easement clause, every state code, every line of that covenant she assumed nobody would ever open. What happened next changed this entire neighborhood forever. HOA ever touch your property without asking? What would you do? And what state are you in? Drop it below. Let me give you the full picture, because context is everything. Pinecrest Falls is one of those mid-sized Virginia suburbs that looks like a Norman Rockwell painting from the outside. Wide streets, brick mailboxes, American flags snapping in the October wind, but functions more like a small feudal kingdom once you're actually living in it. The HOA here isn't just a suggestion box. It's a finely tuned machine for generating fees, enforcing petty rules, and making sure that anybody who bucks the system pays for it in time, money, or sleep. I bought my house in 2010, right after my divorce was finalized. Fresh start. My daughter Waverly was 7 years old and needed stability more than I did. The neighborhood seemed good. Solid schools, quiet streets, the kind of place where kids still ride bikes until the streetlights come on. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was the particular personality of the woman who ran the HOA like it was her personal fiefdom. Her name was Constance Vreeland. Constance was the kind of woman who introduced herself by her full name, with the emphasis on both syllables, who wore blazers to neighborhood block parties, and who had apparently decided sometime in the mid-2000s that managing the Pinecrest Falls HOA was the highest office to which she would ever ascend, and she was going to govern accordingly. She'd been board president for 11 consecutive years when our story begins. 11 years. The woman had more institutional power in that zip code than the county supervisor. In the early years, she and I maintained a frosty but functional détente. I paid my dues on time. I kept my lawn trimmed. I even volunteered for the fall cleanup crew 2 years running, which I now consider one of the great strategic errors of my life, because it gave her my cell number and a false sense that I was manageable. The friction started slowly. A letter about my mailbox post being 2 inches off the approved alignment. A warning about my garbage bins being visible from the street on a non-collection day, because I'd left them out after getting back from an emergency root canal. A fine for my daughter's hand-painted basketball hoop, which Waverly had decorated with sunflowers and our last name. The fine cited unapproved exterior modifications. Waverly was 12. Each time, I filed the paperwork, paid the fine, bit my lip. I'm a licensed electrician, not a lawyer. I didn't know what tools I had. I just knew the rules felt designed not to maintain standards, but to remind people like me, a single dad, a tradesman, not a developer or a retired attorney, that we were guests in our own homes. The driveway incident was a different level entirely. The HOA had secured a grant, a genuine public grant from the county, to build a new community pavilion at the eastern end of the neighborhood common area. The project required heavy equipment access, and Constance, in her infinite authority, had determined that the most efficient route for that equipment ran directly across the corner of my property, my driveway, the part I use every single morning to get Waverly to school and myself to job sites by 7. No vote, no meeting, no notification beyond a single-page form letter, postmarked 3 days after the machines had already arrived. The letter described it as a temporary easement activation, under a clause buried on page 34 of the HOA's Master Covenants document, a document I had signed 14 years ago without reading, the way every normal human being signs a 60-page HOA agreement, because who actually reads those? Constance Vreeland did. She had read every word. She had been waiting for the right project and the right target. That morning, standing in my bathrobe, cold coffee in hand, Staring at the fresh tire tracks cutting through the concrete apron I'd laid myself in 2015, I made a decision. I was going to read it too. Every single word. The first thing I did was call the construction company. Not Constance. Not the HOA hotline. The actual company operating the equipment. I found the logo on the side of the excavator. Durfield Site Services, out of Roanoke. I had their number pulled up on my phone before the morning fog had fully lifted. The smell of diesel was already thick in my front yard, that sharp mechanical tang that sticks to the back of your throat, and I could hear the low idle of a second machine somewhere behind the fence line, a basso profundo rumble that my next-door neighbor's dog was losing his mind over. The site supervisor's name was Terry. Terry was polite enough, in the way that men who work heavy equipment are polite when they sense they're standing in a legal gray area. He confirmed, yes, they had a signed work order from the HOA. Yes, the access route had been provided to them in writing. No, he hadn't personally verified property lines. His crew had been told the driveway corner was common area. It's not, I said. I have the survey. I have the plat. That concrete is mine. Terry went quiet for a second. You might want to take that up with the folks who hired us. Oh, I will, I said. But right now, I'm taking it up with you. Can you pause operations until we sort the access issue? Terry said he'd call his boss. That was the last I heard from Terry for 5 days. I went inside, found the original survey plat in the filing cabinet where responsible homeowners keep such things. Made 3 photocopies, put one in my car, one in my email, and one in a manila folder labeled, and I'm not making this up, in case of Constance. I had started that folder in 2018, after the basketball hoop incident. Sometimes preparation is just stored up frustration, looking for a useful outlet. Then I called the HOA's official line and left a calm, measured, fully documented message explaining that heavy equipment had accessed my private property without proper consent, that I was requesting an immediate suspension of operations until a formal easement review could be conducted, and that I was preserving all records of the damage to the concrete apron for potential civil action. Constance called back inside 40 minutes. That was a record. Her tone was the verbal equivalent of someone straightening their blazer before responding to a complaint. Mr. Holloway, the easement provisions in your deed covenants are quite clear. Section 7, subsection D, paragraph 3 permits the association to activate a temporary easement with 60 days written notice, I said. I looked it up this morning. The postmark on my letter was October 14th. Today is October 17th. That's 3 days, Constance, not 60. The pause that followed was approximately 4 seconds long. In my experience, 4 seconds of silence from Constance Freeland was the rough equivalent of a lesser person saying, "Oh no." "The board will review," she said finally. "Operations will continue in the meantime." And they did. The next morning, 2 full-size excavators rolled over that corner again, and this time they clipped the edge of my landscaping border. 4 pressure-treated timber pieces I'd installed in 2019, stained and level, the kind of detail that takes a Saturday and a level and more curse words than you'd think, just splintered, like nothing. I photographed everything, time-stamped photos, emailed to myself and to a Gmail account I created specifically for this purpose, pinecrestfallsrecord@gmail.com. Yes, I was already thinking about documentation. No, I am not normally this organized. But there's something about watching a machine destroy something you built with your own hands that sharpens the organizational instincts considerably. On day 3, I hired a property surveyor, a retired county assessor named Harlan Beck, who had the kind of weathered, unhurried precision that made you feel like he'd surveyed this exact type of dispute before. For $375, Harlan came out, shot his measurements, and confirmed in writing that the construction access route crossed 47 square feet of my deeded private property at its widest incursion. He also noted, in his dry, professional way, that the route appeared to have been drawn to avoid the property of the 2 other homes that might have been used as access points, one of which, he mentioned, belonged to the board treasurer. Let me say that again. Of the 3 possible access routes to the construction site, the one that went through private property, the only one that required any kind of easement at all, ran directly through my lot. The other 2 routes would have required minor inconvenience to HOA board members. Harlan handed me his report, said good luck, and drove away in a truck that had more bumper stickers about fishing than I thought was possible on a single vehicle. I sat on my porch steps that evening, the October air carrying the first real bite of cold, the faint smell of fresh-turned earth drifting from the construction zone, and I thought, they didn't pick my driveway because it was efficient. They picked it because they assumed I wouldn't fight back. That assumption was about to become their most expensive mistake. Armed with Harlan's survey report, I requested an emergency HOA board meeting. Formally, in writing, certified mail, return receipt requested. Because when you want people to know you're serious, you spend the $4.75 on the green card. The board met 12 days later in the community room of the neighborhood clubhouse, a fluorescent-lit beige box that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and disappointment. 7 board members around a folding table. Constance at the head, wearing, I swear to you, a blazer with brass buttons. The kind of formality that tells you someone treats their volunteer HOA position as the apex of their civic importance. I brought 3 things to that meeting: Harlan's survey report, a printed copy of the HOA covenant with Section 7, subsection D, highlighted in yellow, and a single-page summary of my damages: the concrete apron, the landscaping timbers, the disruption to my ability to use my own property, totaling approximately $4,100. I presented calmly. I used my indoor voice. I made eye contact. I even said thank you for the opportunity to address the board, like a man who has read about de-escalation techniques. Constance heard every word, waited for me to finish, and then said, Mr. Holloway, the board has reviewed the easement language and stands by its interpretation. The clause does not specify 60 days for temporary access. It specifies 60 days for permanent easements. Temporary access requires only reasonable notice, which the board provided. Reasonable, I said. 3 days. In the board's judgment, yes. I looked around the table. 3 board members were studying the surface of their folding tables with tremendous focus. One was eating a granola bar. Only one. A younger woman named Priscilla Dunbar, who I'd spoken to maybe twice at neighborhood events, met my eyes with the look of someone who wanted very badly to be anywhere else. I'll be pursuing remediation through other channels then, I said. I packed up my folder. I thanked them again, because I am nothing if not polite in public settings, and I walked out into the cold night air. Here's where the story shifts gears. Back home, I did something I should have done 11 years ago. I read every page of that covenant document. All 61 of them. I made notes in the margins with a red pen, the way my high school English teacher once told me to read anything that mattered. What I found was a document full of vague language, self-referential authority, and one genuinely fascinating structural problem. The board had been operating on a provision that allowed them to authorize projects above $15,000 by a simple majority vote. Standard stuff, but buried in the amended bylaws from 2017, an amendment the board had passed quietly with minimal community notice, was a revision to that threshold. The 2017 amendment required any capital improvement project exceeding $25,000 to be put to a membership vote. Full stop. The community pavilion project, the one my driveway was being destroyed to support, the one funded by that county grant, the contract with Durfield Site Services was for $67,000. There had been no membership vote. Not in 2023, not in 2022. At no point had the HOA's 214 homeowner members been asked to approve this project. Constance had shepherded it through the board as a standard improvement, apparently banking on the fact that nobody reads the 2017 amendments. I read them. Twice. I then called my cousin Deb, who had spent 20 years as a paralegal in Richmond. Deb had helped me with my divorce paperwork and had the particular professional superpower of translating legal language into plain English with a speed and precision that I found genuinely awe-inspiring. I read her the relevant passage. She was quiet for a moment. Garrett, she said, that project is currently operating without member authorization. The letters landed on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, my phone had received 47 text messages from neighbors I had never spoken to in my life. Some were supportive, some were confused. A few were from people who had their own grievances against the board. A fence dispute that had dragged on for 3 years. A pool renovation fee that nobody could account for. A gate code change that had been billed as a security upgrade fee without explanation. The letters had cracked something open. Constance's response arrived in my inbox at 6:14 a.m. on Saturday. The subject line read, "Notice of covenant violation, unauthorized distribution of materials." She was citing me for distributing misleading communications to HOA members, which she claimed violated a clause about members not being permitted to impersonate or act on behalf of the board in official communications. The fine, $500. The demand, a written retraction distributed to all 214 addresses at my expense. I actually laughed, out loud, alone in my kitchen, the smell of my coffee going cold again, because some things never change. Here's the thing about that violation notice. It was wrong, and not just factually. The HOA Covenant's anti-impersonation clause specifically applies to communications that claim to be from the board or purport to carry board authority. My letter had said nothing of the sort. It was a communication from a homeowner to fellow homeowners, referencing public documents. That's not impersonation, that's assembly. It's speech. It's what homeowners in an HOA are legally entitled to do in every state in the Union, including Virginia, under the Virginia Property Owners Association Act. Takeaway. In Virginia, HOA members have an explicit statutory right to communicate with other members about HOA matters. A board cannot fine you for it. Virginia Code Section 55.1-1815 for the people who want to Google that. I responded to Constance's notice with a single paragraph citing the statute and informing her I would not be retracting anything, would not be paying the fine, and would be filing a formal complaint with the Virginia Common Interest Community Board, the state regulatory body that oversees HOAs, if the fine was not rescinded within 10 business days. She did not rescind it, so I filed the complaint. The CICB complaint process is not glamorous. It's a PDF form and a certified mail submission, but it creates an official state-level record that an HOA is being investigated for potential violations. That record is not sealed. It is, in fact, public, and it shows up when anyone searches for the HOA's name in certain legal databases. This was becoming interesting. In the meantime, a woman named Rosalind Ferber knocked on my door. Rosalind lived 4 streets over, and I recognized her from the fall cleanup crew. Tall, composed, the kind of person who shows up early, works efficiently, and leaves without asking for credit. She was holding a copy of my letter. "I'm a licensed CPA," she said without preamble. "I've had concerns about the HOA's financials for 2 years. I tried to get access to the audit reports at the last annual meeting and was told they were unavailable." She paused. "They're legally required to provide them. Under Virginia law, members can request financial records." "I know that now," I said. "I have a feeling there's more in those numbers than just the pavilion," she said. "If you're building a case, you might want someone who can read a balance sheet." I invited her in for coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the one with the uneven leg I've been meaning to fix since 2021, and Rosalind laid out what she suspected: discrepancies between the HOA's stated reserve fund balance and the actual expenditures she could trace from meeting minutes. The numbers didn't add up, not dramatically, not in a way that would make a newspaper headline on its own, but in the quiet, persistent way that suggests someone has been treating a community fund like a personal float account. "How do we prove it?" I asked. "We request the records," she said, "in writing, certified mail. They have 10 business days to comply, or they're in violation of the POAA. If they refuse or stall, that's another complaint to the CICB." We sent the formal financial records request that afternoon. I was now running 2 active state-level complaints and had approximately 60 neighbors who had responded to my letter with some flavor of, "I never knew I could do anything about this." The machinery of accountability was slow, but it was turning. Constance, to her credit, felt it turning, because the following week, she did something that accelerated everything. She called Waverly's school. My daughter was a senior, 18 years old. She'd been accepted early decision to Virginia Tech, full academic scholarship, mechanical engineering, the kind of news that makes a single dad cry in a Costco parking lot, not that I'm admitting to that. Constance contacted the principal's office to raise, and I am quoting directly from the follow-up email she later sent me, concerns about the behavior of a parent who may be engaged in targeted harassment of community volunteers. She tried to weaponize my daughter. That was the moment I stopped playing defensively. The financial records arrived, partially. The HOA's management company, a firm called Meridian Community Solutions, sent over a sanitized packet that included meeting minutes and a summary budget report, but conspicuously omitted 3 years of bank statements and the detailed line-item ledger for the reserve fund. Rosalind took one look at the packet and made a noise that CPAs apparently make when they spot a deliberate omission, a small, precise exhale through the nose. "They sent the menu but not the receipts," she said. "We filed a second records request, specifically demanding the documents they'd withheld. And while we waited, Rosalind did something that changed the entire shape of our understanding. She pulled the county records. In Virginia, when an HOA files a lien on a property, which they're entitled to do for unpaid dues, that lien becomes part of the public property record." Rosalind spent an afternoon at the county courthouse with a notebook and a thermos of tea, and she found something extraordinary. Over the past 4 years, the Pinecrest Falls HOA had placed liens on 11 properties. Standard enforcement procedure, theoretically. But when Rosalind cross-referenced those 11 addresses against the HOA's own membership roster and dues records, a pattern emerged that was impossible to miss once you saw it. 9 of the 11 liens had been placed on homes whose owners had, at some point, publicly disagreed with board decisions, attended a meeting and asked questions, written a letter, run for a board seat and lost. The correlation wasn't coincidence, it was a methodology. More damaging still, 2 of those liens had been placed on properties where the dues were, in fact, current. The homeowners had paid on time. The liens had been filed anyway, and in both cases, the affected owners had quietly paid additional resolution fees to Meridian Community Solutions to get the liens removed. Fees that had no basis in the HOA's published fee schedule. Fees that had been paid directly to Meridian, with no accounting back to the HOA. We stared at that for a long moment. "That's not an HOA enforcement action," Rosalind said. "That's a shakedown. The formal term, and this is important, write this down, is fraudulent lien placement. In Virginia, filing a lien on a property knowing the debt is not valid is a civil tort and potentially a criminal act under the Virginia Consumer Protection Act. The resolution fees paid to Meridian, if they were diverted from HOA accounts, could constitute misappropriation of association funds, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor and, at higher dollar amounts, a felony. Takeaway: fraudulent HOA liens are actionable. If you've paid fees to have a lien removed that you believe was wrongfully filed, you may have a civil claim, and depending on the amount, a criminal referral path. Google Virginia Code Section 55.1-1833. We now had a procedural violation in the pavilion approval process, a retaliatory fine against me in violation of state speech protections, a partial financial document production suggesting deliberate concealment, and a pattern of potentially fraudulent liens affecting real homeowners who had never understood what had been done to them. Rosalind called 2 of those 9 homeowners that evening. Both confirmed they'd paid the resolution fees. Neither had ever been told they had grounds to challenge the liens. One of them, a retired postal worker named Thaddeus Green, who'd lived in Pinecrest Falls for 22 years, sat quietly on the phone for a moment after Rosalind explained what the records showed. Then he said, "How do I help?" The next 2 weeks were the most organized I had been in my adult life, which is saying something, because electricians live and die by the checklist. I converted my dining room table into a command center. I'm not proud of this. Waverly called it Dad's conspiracy wall, and took a photo that she apparently sent to her friends at school. But between the printed documents, the sticky note timeline, the legal pad full of cross-references, and the laptop open to 14 browser tabs, it did have a certain unhinged productivity to it. Let me walk you through the strategy, because I want you to understand not just what happened, but what tools made it happen. Because every single one of these is a tool that any homeowner can use. First, the physical element. We needed to document, in real-time and undeniable terms, what was happening on the construction site. A neighbor 2 houses down, a semi-retired contractor named Boyd Whitfield, who had the kind of workshop that made me genuinely envious, had a trail camera he used for deer observation on his back property. We set it up on my fence line, angled to capture the construction access route and my driveway corner. Motion activated, time-stamped, uploading automatically to a cloud account. Every vehicle, every pass, every equipment drag across my property line, recorded. Boyd also happened to know the county permit inspector assigned to the pavilion project, a detail that would become useful later in ways neither of us anticipated at the time. Second, the legal infrastructure. Deb connected me with a property rights attorney in Richmond named Vivian Okafor, who had spent 15 years doing exactly this kind of HOA litigation, and who had the calm, methodical energy of a person who has heard every version of this story and knows exactly how it ends when you do the work correctly. Vivian reviewed our entire file in a weekend. Her assessment: we had a strong procedural case against the pavilion approval process. We had a solid retaliation claim against the fine levied on my letter campaign, and the lien pattern Rosalind had documented was, in her words, serious enough that I would personally recommend involving the County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, not as a threat, as a next legitimate step. Vivian's fee was real. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, but she agreed to take the case on a reduced-rate retainer with a contingency component because she believed we would win and because she genuinely hated what she was looking at. Sometimes lawyers are just people. Third, the community mobilization. This was Thaddeus's contribution, and it was the one that changed the scale of everything. Thaddeus had lived in Pinecrest Falls for 22 years. He knew everybody. He had the kind of deep neighborhood credibility that I, as a relative newcomer, simply didn't have. When Thaddeus started making phone calls, not emails, actual phone calls, homeowners who had been passive or confused became engaged and angry. Within a week, he had organized a community information session at his church fellowship hall, 2 blocks outside the HOA's geographic boundaries, and therefore entirely outside their authority. 47 residents came, on a weeknight, in November. That's not a small number for a neighborhood of 214 homes. Rosalind presented the financial summary. I presented the procedural violations. Vivian, who attended pro bono as a professional courtesy to the community, explained the legal options in language that a room full of electricians, teachers, retired postal workers, and young families could follow. Priscilla Dunbar, the board member who had looked uncomfortable at the board meeting, was there too, sitting in the back row. She didn't say anything until the very end. Then she stood up and said, "I want to show you something." She had printed an internal email chain from the board's shared account, which, as an active board member, she was fully authorized to access. The chain showed Constance and the board treasurer discussing the pavilion project routing, the routing that went through my property. One email from Constance read, "Garrett Holloway is the least organized homeowner we have. He won't push back, use his driveway." The room was absolutely silent for about 3 seconds. Then it wasn't. The fourth strategic element was the simplest. We contacted the local paper, not the big Richmond dailies, but the Pinecrest Falls Courier, a weekly that covered exactly this kind of neighborhood-level governance story and had the readership of exactly the people who would care about it. A reporter named Augustina Delworth had covered HOA disputes twice in the previous year. She was interested from the first email. We were not going to make noise. We were going to make a record. And then we were going to let that record speak, at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right audience. When a machine senses it's losing control, it doesn't stop. It overreaches. Constance's first move was to call a special emergency board meeting, without notifying homeowners in the manner required by the covenants. The meeting minutes, when Priscilla later obtained them, showed that the board had voted, 6-1, to amend the bylaws to eliminate the membership vote requirement for capital projects. They planned to do this retroactively, effectively laundering the pavilion approval after the fact. The problem with retroactive bylaw amendments, and this is worth knowing, is that they cannot be applied to actions already taken or legal claims already filed. You cannot pass a new rule today to cover the misconduct of yesterday. In Virginia, under the POAA, bylaw amendments also require a specific notice period before they take effect. The board had posted notice of the amendment for exactly 4 days before voting on it. The required minimum is 21 days. Takeaway: retroactive bylaw amendments designed to eliminate legal exposure for already committed violations are themselves violations. In Virginia, you have grounds to challenge them under Section 55.1-1815. When Vivian received word of this via Priscilla, she sent a 1-page cease and desist letter to the board and to Meridian Community Solutions, informing them that the amendment was procedurally invalid. that our existing claims were not affected by it, and that further attempts to alter the governing documents to defeat legitimate homeowner claims would be treated as obstruction. Constance's response was to escalate personally. She began calling homeowners who had attended Thaddeus's information session. We know this because 3 of them called me to report it. She characterized the meeting as organized by outside agitators, which would have been funny if it weren't so revealing. Thaddeus Green, 22-year resident and retired federal employee, characterized as an outside agitator. The cognitive dissonance required for that characterization is genuinely impressive. She also, and this is where it gets both petty and stupid, filed a complaint with the county zoning office, claiming that I had constructed an unpermitted structure in my backyard. The structure in question was a storage shed I had built in 2018, properly permitted, with a permit that I had kept in a manila folder in my filing cabinet, alongside my survey plat and my HOA covenant. The zoning officer who called me about it was named Daryl. Daryl sounded mildly apologetic when I read him the permit number over the phone. "I'll close this out," he said. "I'm sorry for the trouble." "Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" I asked. A pause. "It was filed anonymously." "Right," I said. Boyd's trail camera, meanwhile, had captured something genuinely useful. A sequence of footage showing a Meridian Community Solutions vehicle, the company's logo visible on the door, making 3 separate visits to the construction site, at times outside normal business hours. The visits appeared to correlate with the dates on which 2 of the financial transactions Rosalind had flagged had cleared. It was circumstantial. It wasn't proof of anything actionable by itself, but it was another thread in a fabric that was becoming harder to dispute. Around this time, Waverly came home from school and sat down across from me at my conspiracy wall table. She was 17, going on 42, my kid, the kind of teenager who read the news and had opinions about municipal bond financing, which I blame on whatever they're doing in AP government these days. "Dad," she said, "are you winning?" "I think so," I said. "I think we're close." "Good," she said, because I looked up Constance Vreeland on the county assessor's website. She slid a printed page across the table. "Her property taxes have been underpaid by a consistent amount for the past 3 years. The discrepancy started in 2020, the same year the HOA changed management companies to Meridian." I stared at her. "What?" she said. "I'm going to be a mechanical engineer. I like systems. Sometimes I look at systems." I called Rosalind. Rosalind confirmed what Waverly had found within a day of looking at it. The discrepancy in Constance's property tax records wasn't dramatic, about $1,800 per year. But it was consistent, and it traced to an exemption Constance had been claiming under a county senior citizen tax relief program that she did not, based on her county voter registration and her property's assessed value, appear to qualify for. Now, I want to be careful here because this is the part of the story where it's tempting to go wide and accuse and extrapolate. We didn't do any of that. Rosalind was precise. She documented the discrepancy and the public records that supported it, and she handed that documentation to Augustina Delworth at the Courier with a note that said, effectively, "This is a public record story, not a personal attack." Augustina knew the difference. What was happening on the legal front was moving faster. Vivian had filed our formal civil complaint in Richmond Circuit Court. The complaint named the HOA, Meridian Community Solutions, and Constance Vreeland, individually. The core claims were unauthorized property access, the driveway, retaliatory enforcement action, my fine, procedural violation of the POAA, the pavilion approval, and, most significantly, civil fraud in the lien placement scheme. Thaddeus and 3 other affected homeowners had joined the complaint as co-plaintiffs. The moment a civil complaint is filed, it becomes a public record. Vivian filed on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, Augustina Delworth had the docket number and had pulled the full complaint. The County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, which Vivian had quietly briefed 2 weeks prior, called her on Friday. They had been, apparently, looking at Meridian Community Solutions already, not in connection with our HOA, but in connection with a separate matter involving a different community association in the adjacent county. Our documentation gave them a second data point. They were, the call suggested, taking it seriously. Meanwhile, Constance made her final, desperate play. She called a special general membership meeting of the HOA, required a quorum of 20% of homeowners, 43 people. Her plan, as best we could reconstruct it from the agenda she was legally required to distribute, was to use the membership meeting to pass a resolution, retroactively endorsing all board actions in the past year, effectively creating a record of member approval that hadn't existed. She expected maybe 50 people to show up, the kind of meeting where the people most motivated to attend are the ones who agree with the chair. Thaddeus had been making phone calls for 2 weeks. On the evening of the special meeting, a Tuesday in December, cold enough that you could see your breath in the parking lot of the community clubhouse, the gravel crunching under 100 pairs of boots and dress shoes, 112 homeowners walked in. 112 out of 214. That is not a quorum. That is a mandate. The clubhouse held maybe 80 people comfortably. The rest stood along the walls, sat on folding chairs someone dragged in from the storage closet, or clustered near the door with coffee cups from the urns someone had set up in the parking lot. Boyd Whitfield was there. Rosalind was there. Priscilla Dunbar was there, sitting at the board table but clearly not of it. Thaddeus was near the front, standing straight, wearing the kind of expression that says, "I have been patient for a long time." Augustina Delworth was there with a notepad and a recorder, and I was there with a manila folder, a laptop, and Boyd's trail camera footage loaded on a thumb drive. Constance walked in 7 minutes late. She saw the room. She saw what the room meant, and for just a moment, I watched it happen. She looked like someone who had, for the first time, genuinely miscalculated. She smoothed her blazer. She sat down. She called the meeting to order. The trap was set. It was time to spring it. Constance opened with the agenda item she'd written the meeting for, a resolution to ratify all board actions in calendar year 2023. She read it out in her boardroom voice, the one calibrated for people who aren't paying close attention. The resolution was long and full of passive constructions, designed to launder specifics into abstraction. Various administrative decisions, routine capital improvement actions, standard enforcement proceedings. The kind of language that says everything while admitting nothing. When she finished reading, she asked for a motion to approve. Priscilla Dunbar said, "I move that we table the resolution pending a full financial audit by an independent CPA." There was a second before she finished the sentence. The room erupted, not in chaos, in noise. The noise of 112 people who had been quiet for too long and had just been handed the microphone. What followed was the most remarkable 45 minutes I have ever spent in a folding chair. Member after member stood and spoke. The woman whose fence had been under a 3-year enforcement action for a post that was half an inch out of the approved color range. The retired teacher who'd received a lien notice the same week she'd circulated a petition about the pool renovation fees. Thaddeus, who spoke with the measured, devastating clarity of a man who has practiced what he's going to say and knows the weight of every word. "I paid $340 to have a lien removed from my property," Thaddeus said, into a room so quiet that a water heater in the utility closet was audible. "I paid it because I was afraid. I paid it because I didn't know I had rights. I know now, and I want to know where that money went." Then I asked to address the meeting. I connected the thumb drive to the clubhouse's wall-mounted projector, the one they used for movie nights in the summer, and I played 47 seconds of Boyd's trail camera footage. Clear, time-stamped, undeniable. The construction equipment crossing my property line, the Meridian vehicle parked at the site after hours, and the detail that made several people in the room audibly gasp. The footage of a board member, the treasurer, arriving at the site with a Meridian representative at 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, 2 days after our financial records request had been filed. I put up, on the same projector, a side-by-side of Constance's internal email. "Garrett Holloway is the least organized homeowner we have. He won't push back, use his driveway." And the survey plat showing exactly how much of my property had been accessed without consent. I read both aloud, slowly, with feeling. Then I put up Rosalind's financial summary, the lien pattern, the unaccounted resolution fees, the reserve fund discrepancies. 3 years of numbers that told a story no one in that room could deny once they saw them laid out plainly. Constance said, "These materials are misleading, and this presentation is out of order." "On what procedural grounds?" Vivian asked from the second row, in her professional voice, the one that makes it clear she has read every relevant statute and is giving you exactly one opportunity to cite a legitimate basis. Constance did not answer. The membership voted on Priscilla's motion to table the ratification resolution and call for an independent audit. 97 in favor, 4 opposed, 11 abstentions. On a second motion, proposed from the floor by Thaddeus, calling for the immediate resignation of the board president and treasurer pending the audit, 89 in favor. Constance said nothing. She stood up, gathered her materials, and walked out of the room with the unhurried composure of someone who had made a decision before anyone could make it for her. The treasurer followed. The room was very loud, and then very warm, and someone opened a window, and the cold December air came in smelling of wet gravel and pine. And I sat there in my folding chair for a moment before Boyd clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to rattle my back teeth. "Good night, son," he said, which is what Boyd says when things go the way they should. In the parking lot, Augustina Delworth filed her story on her phone. The Pinecrest Falls Courier ran it the following Thursday. The Richmond Times-Dispatch picked it up the week after. The Commonwealth's Attorney's Office issued a public statement confirming an ongoing investigation into Meridian Community Solutions and certain individuals associated with the management of the Pinecrest Falls HOA. Constance Vreeland did not run for re-election. She did not run for anything. As far as I know, she still lives 3 streets over. I have not spoken to her since. Here's how things landed. The civil complaint settled 8 months later. The HOA's insurance carrier negotiated a resolution that included full restoration of my driveway and landscaping at no cost to me. Final bill, $6,200, paid entirely by the HOA. Rescission of all retaliatory fines issued to me and to the 3 other homeowners who had been cited for participating in the information session, and a structured repayment to the 4 homeowners, including Thaddeus, who had been subjected to fraudulent lien placements and paid the associated resolution fees. Meridian Community Solutions settled with the county separately. The terms were not disclosed publicly, which typically means they were not favorable to Meridian. The independent financial audit, conducted by a Richmond firm that Rosalind helped select, found approximately $41,000 in unaccounted reserve fund disbursements over a 4-year period. The audit report was shared with the Commonwealth's attorney. The criminal investigation was, as of the time I'm telling you this story, still ongoing. I'm not going to get ahead of that process, but I will say the investigation is real, it is active, and it involves real money that came from the dues paid by 214 families who thought they were maintaining a community. The pavilion did get built, eventually. The new board, which includes Priscilla as president and Rosalind as treasurer, put the project back out to vote with full membership notice. 163 homeowners participated. The vote passed, 141 to 22. They chose a different construction company, used a different access route that required only minor temporary easements with properly noticed and compensated homeowners, and came in $9,000 under the original budget. When it opened in the spring, they held a community picnic. Boyd brought a pulled pork cooker the size of a small vehicle. The smell of hickory smoke drifted over the whole neighborhood all afternoon, warm and thick and democratic. Waverly came home from her first semester at Virginia Tech for the weekend, and spent most of it eating cornbread and talking to Thaddeus about municipal governance systems, which is, I will admit, not the conversation I imagine my daughter having at 18, but it is very much the daughter I raised. There's one more thing. At the picnic, Thaddeus announced that the HOA, under new management, had voted to establish the Pinecrest Falls Community Scholarship Fund, seeded with the settlement funds recovered through the civil complaint. The initial endowment of $22,000 was designated to provide annual scholarships to graduating seniors from the neighborhood, prioritizing students pursuing public administration, law, or civic engagement fields. The first recipients would be announced at the following year's annual meeting. Waverly already goes to Virginia Tech on a full academic scholarship, so she doesn't need it. But she was there when Thaddeus announced it, and she started crying in a way that she then pretended was allergies, which is a Holloway family tradition at moments of unexpected grace. I rebuilt the driveway apron myself. I know I could have left it to the contractors, and legally I could have pushed for more. But there's something clarifying about pouring your own concrete, about the weight of the float in your hands, and the chemical smell of fresh cement in the morning air, and the way a good screed line feels under the blade. I did it on a Saturday in early April, Waverly home for spring break, handing me tools and asking questions she already knew the answers to. It took 5 hours. It'll last 20 years. Now, before I let you go.
You know what nobody talks about? The morning after. Garrett didn't pop champagne. He went back outside, looked at that torn up driveway corner, and started measuring for the repair himself. Because that's what guys like him do. They fix things with their hands, not with switches. 112 neighbors showed up that night. Not because Garrett was loud, because he was right, and he could prove it. Page 34, Section 7, 60-day notice requirement, and $67,000 spent without single-member vote. That's not a technicality. That's your money, your property, your vote. Handed to one woman with a blazer and 11 years of unchecked authority. Constance didn't lose because Garrett got lucky. She lost because she assumed silence meant consent. It usually does until it doesn't. Here's what I want you to sit with. Somewhere in your HOA packet right now, the one you signed and never read, there's probably a clause that protects you, and someone on your board already knows it's there. Do you? If your HOA has ever pulled something that felt wrong but you couldn't prove it, drop it in the comments. State, situation, whatever you got. You'll be surprised how many people are dealing with the exact same thing 3 streets over and have no idea. If the story hit home, share it with one neighbor. Not for us, for them. Subscribe if you want more. We've got plenty more stories where this came from. The most dangerous person in every neighborhood isn't the one who breaks the rule, it's the one who wrote them and counted on you never finding out.